There is a epic scene in the book, The Two Towers, also in the movie, The Two Towers. That is the second of the books from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it involves this place called Helm's Deep. Okay, if you've ever seen the movie or read the books, you are familiar with the idea of Helm's Deep. Helm's Deep is a massive fortress that is built kind of into a valley between two cliffs. And the idea being that the caves behind it and the cliffs on either side, you can only attack it from the front. And so it's become this place that mankind goes to when they realize that they're vastly outnumbered, when they realize that they can't win in open combat, when they realize the other army is superior, they retreat to Helm's Deep. It is their fortress, their stronghold. Because you can't surround them, you can't outnumber them, you can't overwhelm them. The only way to get up is up that ramp. And so instead of fighting a whole army at once, you can fight them 6 bad guys at a time as they try to come up the ramp. And the legend is that Helm's Deep has never fallen. But no matter how big the opposing army, no matter how vicious they are, no matter how many weapons they have, Helm's Deep has never fallen. That it is this stronghold, this refuge, this place of safety, this fortress, that if you retreat here, you will be safe. The reason I start there is because we're going to read from Psalm 62. I told you that earlier. If you've got your Bible, go ahead and read or turn to Psalm 62. And Psalm 62 is one of many, many places in the book of Psalms. Many, many places in the book of Psalms where God is described as our refuge. That He is our strong tower, that He is a stronghold, that He is our fortress, that He is the place we hide, that He is our shelter in the midst of the storm. And every time I read one of those texts, including Psalm 62, my little nerd brain pictures Helm's Deep. It pictures this impenetrable fortress that no matter how big the thing coming against me, no matter how great the number of enemies, no matter how overwhelming the odds, if I have hidden inside Helm's Deep, I will not be defeated. And David uses that imagery here as he talks about God. That if I hide my life in Him, if I put my hope in Him, if I allow Him to be my protector, then I will not be overrun. So we're going to start with just the first 7 verses of Psalm 62. He says, I am at rest in God alone. My salvation comes from Him. He alone is my rock, my salvation, and my stronghold. I will never be shaken. How long will you threaten a man with all of you? Will all of you attack, excuse me, as if he were leaning against a wall or a tottering stone fence? They only plan to bring him down from his high position. They take pleasure in lying. They bless with their mouths, but they curse inwardly. Rest in God alone, my soul, for my hope comes from Him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I will not be shaken. My salvation and glory depend on God. My strong rock, my refuge is in God. And so over and over and over again, you get that imagery. My strong rock, my refuge, my stronghold. That this is the place where I go when I'm outnumbered, overwhelmed, can't go on, and I'm going to trust in God to protect me and take care of me against whatever enemies I may be facing. Now, we have talked a little bit about David through the Psalm series because he wrote many of the Psalms, including this one. And the thing is, even though you see the title, a Psalm of David or a Davidic Psalm, it's hard to pinpoint exactly where this falls in his life. And David lived one of those lives where you could find several moments that seem fitting. It could have been when he was running from Saul. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, right? That David had been chosen to be the next king of Israel. But the current king of Israel wasn't dead yet. And eventually the current king of Israel got really jealous of the next king of Israel and decided, if I kill him, then he can't have my throne. And so Saul began to hunt and chase David. And David spent 6 to 8 years running for his life, hiding in caves, wandering through the wilderness. And you can almost picture it, right? One of those nights as he crawls into a little cleft in the rock and is protected from the storm, he thinks, God is my rock. God is my refuge from the storm. And he pens these words. Or you think of all of the battles that David fought, where on paper he was vastly outnumbered. Whether it's him as a shepherd boy facing down Goliath, or it's him as a general leading his men against the Philistines. And you can imagine him in preparation for battle, knowing how big the army he has to face is, knowing the opposition he's going to see the next day, sitting down and saying, I'm not going to be afraid. I will put my hope in God. I will find rest in God. He is my stronghold. He is my rock. He's going to take me through this battle. And you can see him pinning those words in any number of situations getting ready for battle. Or if you know the story of Absalom, when Absalom, his son, decides that he wants to take the throne from his father David, and he attempts a coup, and David has to leave the palace and run for his life. And he finds himself back in the same wilderness that he was as a young man, except now he's an old man, and the rocks seem a little bit harder, and the hikes seem a little bit steeper. And there he is, and you can almost see him maybe even the night before battle, as he has to go into battle against his son, wage war against his own army, to earn back his throne, to win back what was once his. And you can imagine him writing those words, God, will you protect me? Will you keep me safe? In you is my hope. You alone are my stronghold. The thing is, David wrote a whole bunch of Psalms with this imagery, and they're all over the book of Psalms. If you were to start to read through, you'd find them in Psalms 43 and Psalms 18. You saw it in the video we started with this morning, Psalm 28. And it's hard to place exactly where any of those would fall. But what makes Psalm 62 unique, and the reason I picked it for us this morning, is the use of one particular word that shows up 4 times in those first verses. I don't know if you caught it. And David talks a lot about God as a stronghold, his refuge, his strong tower, his fortress. But what makes Psalm 62 unique is his repetition of the word alone. Verse 1, I am at rest in God alone. Verse 2, he alone is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. Again in verse 5, rest in God alone, my soul, for my hope comes from him. Verse 6, he alone is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I will not be shaken. David is not saying that God is one of the places where he finds safety. David is not saying that God is one of the places that he turns in the midst of the storm. David is not saying that God is one of the people who can help him. David is saying incredibly, incredibly clearly that God is the only place he turns for help in the midst of the storm. That God is the only one who can actually keep him safe. That God is the only one that can actually protect him. That nothing else can hold up under the weight of what David is going through. And so he finds peace only in God. He finds comfort only in God. He finds security only in God. That it is in God alone, not God among a number of other things. And so I just want to kind of connect some dots for you exegetically as we've been going through the book of Psalms. The first week we talked about that yearning within our soul, right? How long, O Lord? How long am I going to suffer? And we all go through these things where we wonder if we're ever going to see the end of them. And we cry out for something to trust in, something to help us. And then last week we talked about the nature and character of God. And that God is not only great, capable of helping you, capable of rescuing you, capable of providing for you. Not only is he strong enough to do that, but he's also incredibly, incredibly good. He wants to help you. He wants to have a relationship with you. He wants what's best for you. And so we talk about our need for a helper. We talk about God's character. And now we move to week 3. And here's the really just important truth. God's the only one who meets those requirements. He's the only one who is big enough. He's the only one who's strong enough. He's the only one who's good enough. He's the only one who's righteous enough. He alone can do those things that you're looking for. Let me illustrate it for you this way. Did you ever do the egg drop challenge when you were in school? Anybody ever do the egg drop challenge? Maybe not. Maybe it's just weird. I did it twice. Once when I was in like 7th grade, and then we did it again when I was in high school in physics class. So here's the thing about eggs. I don't know if you know this about eggs or not. Eggs are fragile. Do you know that? Yeah? Did you ever get a carton of eggs home and realize how fragile they were when you got them home? Like, oh, should not have put the dog food on top of the eggs. That did not go well. But eggs, when you drop them, well, they crack, right? They're very fragile, very easy to break. So one of the things that science classes will do in school is what's called the egg drop challenge, where you're given a set of supplies, a list of things you can use to build, and you build these contraptions to make it so you can drop the egg and it won't break, okay? So people come with all kinds of things. Sometimes you get like parachutes, right? We're going to build a little contraption, put the egg in it, put a parachute on it, so when it falls, it won't fall very fast, and it'll set down nice and gently on the bottom, right? And then sometimes you build something to put it inside of, something that will absorb the shock. My favorite one of this that I saw, and the picture was just too blurry to put on the screen, somebody took a tennis ball and cut it open and filled it with bubble wrap and then put the egg inside and taped the tennis ball closed again so that the tennis ball and bubble wrap would absorb the shock. I don't know if it worked or not, but it was a pretty clever idea. Sometimes they'll suspend it, right? Take pantyhose or rubber bands and you tie it around the egg and you put it in a box and you stretch it out real tight so that when it hits, the egg will kind of bounce in the middle, but the egg doesn't actually hit the ground. It gets suspended in the middle. It doesn't get that sudden jarring stop. And so typically what will happen in a class is you'll spend a week or 2 weeks working on this, building this. Sometimes they say it can only weigh this much, or it can only be this big, or you can only use these types of supplies or items. And you construct what you think is the best way to keep that egg safe. And then comes egg drop day. And when you walk in, everybody's pretty confident. Yeah, this is going to work. I got the parachute and it's going to open and slow it, and then I got some padding around the egg, but it's definitely going to work. And have you ever done this? I don't know what it looked like for you, but at our school, they went up to the roof of the school building, which is about 20, 22 feet off the ground. And they threw it from 20, 22 feet onto a sidewalk at the bottom of the thing. And so in my mind, what I thought about my little pantyhose that had the egg suspended in the parachute, and it still felt really hard, and it did go up and down like this, and it went down enough to hit the sidewalk and splatter, okay? And everybody thought they had a great plan, and everybody thought they had a great design, and almost none of them actually worked. Almost none of them actually kept the egg safe. We all had grand schemes, we all had grand plans, and it turns out very, very few of them actually did their job. And I think about that in terms of how we live life. That so many of us, we take our lives, our hopes, our dreams, our joys, and we put them in something to protect it. And we just hope that it will be able to hold us up. We hope that it will be able to keep us safe. We hope that it will be able to see us through to the end. And then the tests of life come and we find out whether or not it was actually strong enough. The place most of us usually start is we trust in ourselves. That I'm smart and I'm talented and I got a lot of resources and I got a good work ethic and I can overcome whatever life throws at me, right? If I just work hard enough, learn enough, train enough, find the right connections, put enough time in, put enough energy, I can overcome whatever life throws at me. And we think we got it handled. And so we depend on us. We put our hope in us. We put our life in us. And then things happen, right? And there's a disease that we can't quite kick. Or there's this cloud of grief that we just can't quite get to the other side of. Quite frankly, our bodies get old and we don't have the ability to do the work we did 30 years ago. And we're not sure we can work 60 hours a week anymore to make things happen the way we want to. And the energy goes away. And here's the thing. If you spend your life thinking that your intelligence and your work ethic and your skill are going to be enough to protect you, sooner or later, you're going to be disappointed, right? It's not going to hold it together. It's not strong enough. You're not talented enough. You're not good enough to deal with real problems of life. So the next place we often turn is to another person, right? We're going to find somebody else who will fill in the gaps, somebody who will complete us, someone who will encourage us, someone who will build us up, someone who will cover our weak spots. Can I tell you the thing I talk about in marriage counseling almost more than anything else when I'm doing premarital counseling with young couples? They all come in with big doughy eyes and they're happy and they're with the love of their life. And one of the questions on the questionnaire is, why do you want to get married? And they'll write something like, she completes me. Aww. Like, good, you've seen some movies. That's a good place to start. But one of the things we talk about in almost every premarital counseling session is this. If your expectation is that another human being is going to satisfy your own insecurities, they're going to help you deal with your own self-image issues, they're going to complete whatever weaknesses you have, they're going to be there to somehow change you and transform you, that they're going to be your everything, that they're going to be the rock upon which your life is built. If your expectation is that another human being is going to do that for you, man, are you going to be disappointed. Not because marriage isn't wonderful, not because it's not a blessing, not because they don't have your best interests at heart, but because they're human just like you. And they're going to fail and let you down and disappoint you and make promises they can't keep and lose their temper and say things that they can't take back because they're human just like you. And so you can't trust in them. So then we move to the next step. Well, I'm going to put my hope or trust in an organization or a group of some sort, right? I'm going to join the military and find a family there. I'm going to find a church that will support me and encourage me, and the church is going to fix what's wrong with me. I'm going to join a civic organization. I'm going to find an accountability. Nothing wrong with any of those things. But you know who makes up the church? People. Do you know who makes up the army? People. You know who makes up the Elks Club and the Masonic Lodge and all the other organizations? People. You know what makes up your accountability group? People. And you know what happens if you put your hope and your dreams and your needs and your wants and your longings in the hands of other people? It's not going to keep you safe. It cannot protect you. It cannot give you what you need. It cannot. Listen. Our greatest needs are for someone to deal with things like shame, right? We walk around every day dealing with this sense of shame, this recognition that we have messed up, this recognition that we're not who we're supposed to be, this recognition that we should be better than we are, this recognition that we have hurt other people. How are you going to expect your spouse to take care of your shame? How are you going to handle your own shame? You just going to shove it down and pretend like it's not there? How's that working out for you 60 years later? You're going to heap it upon somebody else? Make somebody else deal with it? That's a good way to ruin a marriage, isn't it? You're going to bring it into the church and expect the church to fix it for you? That's a good way to call. You know how you deal with your shame? My peace is in God alone. Because God knows exactly what to do with your shame. Because He took your shame and He nailed it to the cross and said, you don't have to carry that anymore if you don't want to. It has been dealt with. Jesus took your shame, put it on His shoulders, marched it to the top of the hill, and said, I will die in your place. I'll take your shame. I'll take your guilt, and you can be the righteousness of God if you want. I know what to do with your shame. That's why my peace is in God alone. Or what are you going to do with death? I mean, left to your own devices, how are you going to deal with death? Everybody in this room has said goodbye to a friend, or said goodbye to a parent, or said goodbye to a kid, or said goodbye to a spouse, and you'll never see them again left to your own devices. How are you going to deal with that on your own? Where are you going to find the strength for that kind of stuff? You're going to find it in a best friend? You're going to find it in the Masonic Lodge? I'll tell you where you're going to find it. My peace is in God alone. Because after Jesus was nailed to the cross, He was buried in a tomb, and 3 days later He walked out of that tomb and said, death has no sting anymore. For I have faced death, and I have conquered death, and all who are in me will know life and not the grave. That is why David says, only God is my strong tower. Only God is my rock. Only in God can I find peace. Because when it comes to the real issues of life, when it comes to the things that really matter, the things that are deep in our souls, our deep fears, our deep anxieties, this world has nothing to offer. And they can build all the little egg drop devices they want in the world, but our lives are so fragile and they are so weak that when it hits the pavement, the egg's going to shatter. And only in God is there rest. And only in God is there peace. And only in God is there safety. And only in God is there life. In Him alone, says David. And I think this is just the reason I want to drive this home is because we live in a world that is obsessed with security and safety. From the time we're little kids until we're adults, we are obsessed with this idea of feeling safe, right? You're a little kid, you go to bed late at night, what are you scared of? It's almost always the same two things. I'm scared of the dark, and I'm scared of the monster under the bed, right? Then you show them Monsters, Inc., and it doesn't make it any better, right? There really are monsters under the bed? And so from a little age, I put a nightlight in your room, right? I'll give you a teddy bear or a blanket that makes you feel safe, right? And then we become adults and we start putting things in our car, and we get seat belts and we get airbags and analog brake systems and backup cameras, and some of you still can't, never mind. Didn't say that? Stop myself. But we put every safety device we can imagine in our vehicle to make the fact that we're going 80 miles an hour in a 4,000 piece of metal feel safe, right? It's not, but we want to feel safe, and so we put in everything that we can to make it feel that way. Then in our public places, we put in alarm systems and surveillance cameras. It's quite honestly, it's why so many of you carry firearms with you, because it makes you feel safer knowing that you have that sense of protection with you, that I have a way to protect the people around me. You're looking for that sense of safety. We are a people obsessed with wanting to not be afraid, with wanting to feel safe, with wanting to know that our kids are safe, with wanting to know that everything's going to be okay. And here's what I want to tell you, and I want you to hear this. There is nothing in this world that can provide safety. Nothing in this world that can provide true peace. Nothing in this world that can actually protect you from the real stuff. From sin, from shame, from failure, from death, from grief. They haven't made a camera that'll fix shame. They haven't made a firearm that will take away your grief. It doesn't exist. And so David says, "And God alone is my peace. He alone is my rock. He alone is my stronghold. He alone is my strength. In Him only." That's what I'm looking for. What I love about the psalm is it makes a quick pivot point here in verse 8. In verse 8, he moves from talking about his experience with God to speaking to us as a challenge. And he says this. He says, "Trust in Him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts before Him. God is our refuge." Trust in Him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts before Him. God is our refuge. That's your challenge for today. David made his choice. He looked at all of the options. And he kind of reminds me a little bit of Solomon. You remember Solomon, David's son? He wrote the book Ecclesiastes, right? And in Ecclesiastes, Solomon lists all of the things that you can do when you are a rich and powerful king. And all of the places that he looked for meaning in life, and all of the ways he looked for joy in life, and all the ways he looked for satisfaction in life. And so he talks about studying all the books and learning all the philosophies, and he talks about accomplishing great things and building beautiful things and creating art, and he talks about pursuing women and all the physical pleasure that he could pursue, and he talks about fine wine and big feasts and funny comedians and great musicians and pursuing entertainment. He writes about all of these things that he pursues. Yet you know the refrain from that book, many of you. Meaningless, meaningless, a chasing after the wind. All the money in the world, meaningless, meaningless. All the women in the world, meaningless, meaningless. All the entertainment in the world, meaningless, meaningless. All the food in the world, meaningless, meaningless. A chasing after the wind. And David reminds me of that here in the psalm. He goes, listen, you can try all the other things if you want. You can pursue all the other things if you want, but I'm telling you from my experience to put your trust in the Lord, to put your hope in the Lord, to lean on the Lord alone. Trust in Him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts before Him. God is our refuge. And that's the choice before you today. David made his choice, and now you get to make yours. And for some of you watching at home or sitting here in this room, you've never, ever made that choice. You've never decided that you're going to put your life in God's hands. You've never said, I want to follow Him. You've never repented. You've never been baptized. You've never placed your faith and trust in Jesus. You've never said, I want my life to be in God's hands. I want Jesus to deal with my shame. I want Jesus to deal with my guilt. I want the life that comes from a relationship with Him. You've never made that choice. And today could be that day for you. You could decide here and now, I'm ready to make that choice. I want my life to be in His hands. If you're ready to do that, you can leave a comment online. You can come find me in the front row here. We can have a conversation after service. I would love to walk you through what that choice looks like. But I find for many of us who made that choice once, long ago, that we actually have to make that choice every day, don't we? Isn't that what Jesus says when he says you must deny yourself every day and take up your cross? That every day we have to wake up and say, who am I going to build my life upon today? Who am I going to trust with circumstances today? Who am I going to trust with this difficult problem I have to face today? Who gets to determine what my identity is today? Where am I going to find peace today? And every day we have to decide, is God my refuge? Am I trying to be my own refuge? Am I counting on my spouse to be my refuge? Am I counting on somebody else to be my refuge? Or is God alone my stronghold? Is God alone the one that I want to be with? And so I just want to encourage you to use this as a time of prayer and commitment. That you could say what David said. That you could repeat the words that he says in Psalm 62. I am at rest in God alone, for my salvation comes from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. So I will never be shaken. Father, we come to this moment. We get ready to sing a song together. A song that is a prayer of sorts. A prayer to dwell in your presence, a prayer to experience you. But it has these beautiful words that you are our desire, that nothing else will do, that you're all we've ever wanted and you're all we've ever really needed. And Father, we sing these words as worship and as commitment. May you speak to our hearts as we sing them. May you challenge those who've never, ever entered into a relationship with you to know that if they keep putting their life in something else, trusting in something else to take care of them, they're going to end up broken. But you bring peace. You are the protector. You are the stronghold. God, call them to respond in this moment. And for those of us who've been walking with you for a long time, may this be a recommitment, knowing that each day we have to wake up and choose to put our trust in you. Father, receive this song as prayer and worship and a pledge of our faithfulness. In Jesus' name, amen.